Hello and welcome to another ABiQ webinar. And today we are looking at the projects market or a project overview on South Africa. And I'm delighted to have Christy with me from the South African International Network. Christy, I'm going to immediately hand over to you to maybe introduce yourself as well as Sane and maybe share a quick presentation with us.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I have a few minutes to take you through 5 million slides, everybody, and I am going to essentially point out a couple of, we're going to hopefully distribute this to you. I just want to point out a couple of key ideas around the South Africa International Network, and I hope that you can see my slide screen at the moment. So, this is the brochure. It's essentially a brochure you're going to get. This is what's in the brochure. Let me tell you a little bit about us. So the network formed out of the South Africa-Israel Chamber of Commerce. Vicky essentially said she needs to take this into a different direction in 2018, and she has been working with us and the team over the last 2 years to move away from the traditional business networking to something that serves our members. Our objective is to help our members find businesses and projects in Africa and grow their businesses into Africa. And I will talk a little, a couple of key thoughts around that. But the history of Sane is we started in a traditional business network and we have gone into a project organization. This slide is a test. Spot the CEO. Vicky is the CEO and founder of Sane, and the rest of us help her and work with her. The vision of Sane is to make a difference by contributing to the upliftment of society, which is something that most corporates say. Where that comes through in our actual operations is in which projects we work with and select and which members we assist and support. So we're not in the business for making money, we're in the business to make a difference. And when we look at the industries and the types of projects, you will see where that comes through. Service offering, very briefly. We help our members with identifying, scoping, executing projects, import, export requirements, joint ventures, new business development. So again, about growing your business in Africa. And we also have knowledge sharing and information sharing through webinars and newsletters and the traditional things that you get in building communities. Industry sectors, there's a bunch of pictures on the slide there that you can see what we're looking at. We do have a deep focus around mining, energy, construction, because a large chunk of Africa is about infrastructure development and service provision. And many of our funding partners are also in that same space. Africa is a big continent, as most of you will know that work and live here or are interested in investing here. There's statistics around economic growth. I see that this is the old slide. I updated the numbers yesterday, but we did take a hit in African GDP last year, obviously because of COVID. But the projections for 2021 is back up to 3.4, 3.5% growth. On the right-hand side, you will see some of our core partners. The essential story around our partners is we have people that help with market research and information, such as ABiQ. We have development funding agencies such as DTIC, African Development Bank. We have people that will help you establish and staff your projects, execute your business within the laws of the country, tax and so forth. Our partners and ourselves, again, are set up to help projects succeed. That's what we do. Lots of data about Africa. The one thing that I think is fascinating for me about Sane, when people say they have an Africa footprint, they're present in 5 or 10 or maybe 15 or 20 countries. We have trusted legal and accounting partners in every single country in Africa today. So I think our Africa footprint is actually something that is a big advantage for us. And lastly, Africa Forum, we're hosting regular sessions with ABiQ and other partners about what's going on in Africa. And hopefully somewhere in the next few months, we'll talk about Tanzania. So looking forward in anticipation, Emil, with getting data from you guys to help us with the Tanzania Africa Forum session. So Patron members, that's what I wanted to say about SANE. And in the presentation, contact Vicky if you want to know more about what we do or how we can help you. That's my sales pitch. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you very much, Christy. Well appreciated. So yeah, today we have a conversation about South Africa specifically. And I think we want to kick off maybe just with a couple of numbers. So bear with me. I am just going to share my screen quickly with you, just so that we can look at a couple of numbers and statistics. So there we go. So just quickly about ABiQ, you can see, we've got 2,800 active projects, $4.8 trillion worth of active projects across the Middle East and Africa. Almost 40,000 verified people with contact details on our database. South Africa. So, we've got a healthy pipeline of projects in South Africa alone, $178 billion worth of ongoing and upcoming projects. So you see there about 56% of that 178 billion is currently under execution or under construction. And you can see in the second column there, biggest sector is kind of your real estate market, which we term construction, followed by power. So a lot of projects currently active, especially with on the PPP basis. We've got we're probably going to see a couple of updates about car power, which is a fairly hot topic. And then oil and gas is also in there, with investments from Saudi Aramco, of all companies. I think in terms of the framework, I think you're looking at the PPP infrastructure benchmark, which is something that's been done across most of the African, not all, but most of the African, across the world, but most of the African countries is included in that. And I think important to note is South Africa ranks #1 in terms of the PPP benchmark. So that's in Africa, and you can see, it's got a score, it is correct, it's got a score of 71 compared to the world of average, or the world average of 53, and the average for Africa studies is much lower, so Africa scores quite high. Looking at the risk, so I think we need to kind of have a conversation about events that happened in the beginning of the month. It was well publicized and across the world. But looking at a comprehensive risk index, South Africa still ranks #2 in Africa after Botswana. And then it's the third largest market by value of projects, as we've mentioned already, 178 billion, and that's about 10% of all the projects by value in Africa. On the right-hand side, you can see maybe some of the bigger ones in terms of what's coming up. We've got the Richards Bay refinery, and mentioned Saudi Aramco before, so that's where it comes into play. And then obviously a lot on the solar, nuclear power is obviously a big theme. Just looking at the main players there, so we've got, in terms of developers, no surprise, Ministry of Energy, Gauteng Department of Human Settlements, so obviously housing, we've got Saudi Aramco, the refinery I mentioned, Baldwin Properties, and then Musina Makharu, Special Economic Free Zones. You can see contractors on the top right, car power, I mentioned about that, 3 massive plants, Richards Bay, Saldanha, and Kuga. Obviously very contentious. We've had the Ministry of Fisheries, Forestry, Environment that kind of did not approve, didn't give their blessing for the project to proceed. So I guess everything now is under review. And then obviously ABB, Rotec, these are again infrastructure, power and infrastructure related contractors. Looking at financiers in South Africa is Gauteng Partnership Fund, Development Bank of South Africa, African Development Bank is active, as well as the World Bank and the IDC, which was on Christo's slide as well. And then a couple of consultants there, big international names through WSP, SMEC, and Arupus is also in play. So that's kind of my story in terms of looking just from a high level down. Let me just quickly also have a look at just the country profile. We mentioned the risk and PPP there as well. So looking at the South Africa country profile, looking at the events in terms of the rand movement, and you can see, you know, how it's been affected. It's kind of recovered a bit, I guess. And that kind of plays into the risk profile again, which we'll get to. Looking at energy indicators, you know, so oil reserves and so on, power generation, 252 gigawatt in terms of installed capacity. Then, you know, whether it's operational is a different conversation, of course. And then looking at the important drivers for South Africa is obviously population growth. So just looking at where it is now, you know, so at the moment we're 2021, we're at about 60 million people in the country, looking to go up to about 66, so another 6 million over the next 10 years, 10% growth in 10 years. That obviously will drive further demand for effectively everything from a utilities point of view, water, power, everything would be on the up, as well as infrastructure and housing and so on. So that's kind of just a country overview. Let's just quickly go down to the risk point of view. So overall risk 5.8 we can see in terms of credit, peace, health, and so on. It's ranked 12 in the Middle East and Africa. And if we look quickly at the benchmark report and include South Africa in there with the top 3 markets, just look at by population and compare those. So obviously most populous countries in Africa, Nigeria and Ethiopia is 1 and 2, and then you just include South Africa in there as well, just for this benchmark. So you can see currently where we are, well, 2020. Comparison there in terms of population. If we just extrapolate this, you know, go up to 2050, then you see how this completely changes. And I guess maybe not a fair comparison, including Nigeria in this comparison, because that absolutely dwarfs most of Africa. So you can see going from a current 200 million to over 400 million in the same time, compared to South Africa 66, well, goes up to 75 million by 2050. So 22 years. Looking at just the growth rates, enormous. So you can see South Africa is much lower population growth rate compared to Ethiopia and Nigeria. Looking at rankings just quickly from a risk point of view. So currently at this point in time, across the Middle East and Africa, includes GCC countries as well. You've got safest place to invest, UAE, followed by Qatar, then Botswana, interesting, Kuwait, South Africa, number 5 on the list. And then also we can look at the PPP ratings, where South Africa is, we know, number 1, and you can see even compared to the Middle East, it is ranked number 1. So very good position for future investment in South Africa. So with that, let's just maybe go back into a conversation, Christo. You are based in Johannesburg. Maybe just give us a bit of a background, or just, you know, what was the experience or the business sentiment after the events earlier in this month?
I'm going to answer in sort of 2 tranches, I think. The first is the general man on the street business sentiment, if you want to. So I think the majority of the small and medium businesses and civic organizations are encouraged by the community response that says we are standing up, we're protecting our own stuff. And the idea that Chris Hart in his seminar to our members last week expressed, that communities are realizing the government is not going to do it, big business is not going to do it, we have to look after ourselves, is generally positive from a job creation point of view. And the reason this is important, I think, is when we start looking at big business and big projects. So what South Africa desperately needs more than anything else, in my view, and I think Chris has expressed it eloquently, is jobs. We need people to be able to buy food and houses and consume electricity and so forth. So fixing the joblessness problem, if communities start taking more ownership of that, means the GDP growth numbers will become more reliable and more solid, which then means that there would be more money going around to invest in infrastructure and so forth. from a big businesses, big projects point of view. We know the problems we have with service delivery, with infrastructure, with electricity. So I think the opportunity for those kind of projects are massive. The challenges I think we see in that space is the political environment around ownership of land, expropriation, etc., which makes it a little bit skittish for investors to invest in that space. So depending on where the government goes with, I invest in the asset, I own it, I operate it, I get my return, we may or may not see more projects coming off. So I'm really actually interested around the PPP score, because I'd not thought that our public-private participation is that high in South Africa. So that for me is a very interesting data point from your research that I'm desperately keen to dig into and unpack.
Well, I mean, yeah, just in terms of comments, so that's obviously looking at the regulatory framework and practice. That's not an indication in terms of real activity in the market space. So that's not the number of projects in that space. That's just in terms of a framework set up from a legal point of view for anybody to do a PPP project, how well is South Africa aligned to execute the framework and so forth. And that is still a good thing, because you need that. Yeah, if private sector finance is not going to get involved if they're not certain about deliverables and bankability of these projects. You need that framework in place. So that's already a fantastic start. Bear in mind you're competing with places like Saudi Arabia. Well, okay, that's maybe not in Africa, but certainly Saudi Arabia is a massive market in terms of the PPP here at the moment. So they've got an entire directorate just dealing with that. And it's literally, at the moment, there's probably close to 40 PPP projects on the go, compared to South Africa, where there's probably, well, we know they are, but it's certainly not comparable. But nonetheless, the regulatory framework is certainly in place. So I think that's important. Okay, so,
the only thing that's stopping us essentially is political will and commercial interest, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, that is, and I think that's a frustration that comes back to service delivery, that you have to ask the question, how serious are they about, there's a lot of talk, but a lot of very little execution, so even from our point of view, we have limited interaction with South African government, but we do on certain projects that we're working with them. And the response times, there's some project we're working on, we've been at it for a year, and there's just all just talk. Okay, maybe on a government point of view, a year is maybe a short time, I don't know. But certainly from a private sector, project point of view, it's too slow. You need to have that political will, and you need to get the machine to start moving. By comparison, we've had a webinar 2 weeks ago where we had Chris Kirigwa, who's the president of the Kenya PPP unit. And wow, how impressive. Yes, okay, they've completely overhauled the PPP framework, but, things are lined up to roll. He's only been in the role for 6 months or less than a year, and what he's achieved is phenomenal. But that's because the president has appointed him, so he's got a direct presidential appointment, and he's there to make things happen, and it's happening. That's what we need. That's what South Africa needs to really be going on this.
Yeah, so I think Chris's views around, and I don't want to go too deeply in the politics because I'm super not actually qualified to comment about it. His view around what the last month has done to the ANC as a political organization would suggest that it is a little bit of a watershed for them to decide how they want to do this. So again, we come back to one of the things that has come out clearly out of the events around all of the looting is government's incapability to deliver even basic security and protection and services like that. So the pressure to fix that is, I guess, higher. It's the pressure hasn't changed, but the public pressure and the public perception has changed.
Yeah.
So the fact that we have a framework, we had a couple of months ago, we had a PPP kind of conversation with people around the challenges with getting these projects off the ground. And a lot of that had to do with capacity, and a lot of that had to do with political will. Now, capacity hasn't changed. Sorry.
No, well, capacity hasn't changed. You're absolutely right. But I think it is but I totally agree with you that, this is a watershed moment. But I think it's for the country. It's not just for the ANC. Yes, certainly for the ANC as well. But I do think, as a nation, this was a bit of an eye-opener, and I think adjustment in terms of where they, not just service delivery, but just where they place, government and the role of government in the frame of things. So PPP, it is. I think, we need private sector efficiency, and I think this is the case. This is general. We don't want to generalize, but the reality is that it's applicable to all of Africa for sure.
Yeah.
PPP has got to be, if the framework is in place and if you get the right parties and players, involved from the right stages, it's absolutely the way to go forward. There are, a ton of, of success stories out there. Yes, there's a loads of failures as well, but as long as you learn from it, that's good. We, even from Egypt, which is extremely active in the PPP field now, we had Ataranur, who is the president of Egypt's PPP unit, who, gave us examples of massive failures. The first PPP project they did in 2008 was a complete disaster, but they learned from it and then took on the next one, and now they are, quite, they're quite good with it. So we've got a couple of questions here. We just, want to encourage people to ask questions while we go on. So let's just run through a couple of these comments and questions. So the first one is from Raj Matha. Do you have a feeling for the process of cost-benefit analysis for projects? Is there a single hurdle rate for value returned? And then is a CBA disciplined, or is it an ad hoc depending on the politics? As is versus the to be, or the framework is probably a different, I guess, in many situations, the way we foresee things to be executed versus the reality is sometimes, day and night. So is there a cost-benefit analysis for projects on the PPP basis? This is my assumption here, is that yes, I think there is certainly, if it's the right projects, they'll be bankable. Hurdle rate, that's difficult because a lot of it is to do with the cost of capital and where it comes from. So it depends on where the origins of the funds is. I think something for Africa that's been raised before is that, in the likes of maybe South Africa, the rand has been fairly stable over the last few years. We know going back to 2000, so the last 20 years, we know where it's ranged. Yes, it's been volatile at times, but we know the range. But for many, it's difficult to go. We come from a Africa currency where African nations can borrow again, which is a conversationally different set of experts, of which I'm not one. But yeah, so hurdle rate. Every country will have a different approach to it, but it's pretty much private things that could be tested and we could look at. In a lot of the countries is kind of the idea of crowdfunding. If the populace in the country wants better infrastructure, if they contribute through crowdfunding to develop better infrastructure, they become owners of their own newly developed infrastructure as well as the users. For me, that's I think a fantastic way we can get that off the ground. But yeah, so there's different ways, I guess, to execute. But I think the fundamental part is the political will. Have that there, where the government can set the playing field for private sector to operate within and deliver. On a fair basis, it's got to be sustainable, reliable projects.
Yeah. mean, if I can
Any
add to
comments
that.
from you?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Raj, I think it, typical consultant answer, it depends. It depends, I think, in part on the risk profile and also the who is funding it. So a traditional commercial funding, as you can imagine, is more linked to the asset and the risk of how do I get my money back. For many of the PPP projects, which I assume your question might refer to, the key challenge for the private companies who are interested in building water purification or electricity provision or something is a guarantee of revenue. So, for example, one of the models that's pretty interesting is we will build and operate the water purification plant for a period of 10 years or 15 years. But the collection of your water taxes or your water tariffs that you pay as a community currently to the local municipality gets routed to the whatever vehicle we put up, the fund, the trust fund, the special purpose vehicle that collects the tariffs for water. That works, and that comes back a little bit to Catherine's question as well. The community will then be able to see that the money they pay goes towards the provision of the water that they're paying for, and that helps with quite a lot of the capability, corruption, perception issues that we see in some of the badly run local authorities, specifically in South Africa. So Catherine, I think private companies no longer working with government. What, from my personal view, the stuff that we're trying to do, which is really around communities helping themselves, I think we're going to see what we have seen in other countries when local government collapses in its service delivery, where people start saying we will withhold taxes, or we will route our taxes through other funds that is more directly linked to service delivery. So, for example, I'm not paying the local authority all of my taxes. I will pay a private company to fix the potholes. So I think we may see models like that emerging, and I realize this is a insurrection kind of conversation. I think we will see models where private companies and communities will find solutions that exclude government if government is unable or unwilling to participate, if that's a diplomatic phrasing of that. So it may be that government is no longer in the driving seat. If they want to be part of it, they have to run with the rest of the pack, would be, for me, Catherine's answer. And Raj, that comes back to your answer. If it's tax money funding it, the criteria is quite different from if it's a private bank that says, I'm investing in a retail mall because the retail mall creates jobs. But it is quite a different thing from providing clean drinking water. I don't know if that helps answer both of those questions to a degree.
I totally agree with you. I do think that it is it's very much on a project by project basis, and it's very difficult to do, because how do you see a revenue model for transport infrastructure? How do you roads and bridges? How do you, is it only toll roads, or is there a different type of tax that you add, or, levy on it? Where does that revenue come from? So it's got to depend on the project. And in fairness, I think there are certain projects which, you have to go to something like the World Bank or something where it becomes a donor foundation that actually funds the project going forward.
Yeah.
So thanks for that. So another question from Raj is my internet. Is the South African government use a specific discount rate for project approval across energy, water, and transport? I would imagine as a government, it might be different. And I think some of the circumstances or some of the factors around the projects could be job creation, which is one of the main things you've mentioned before.
Yeah.
They might not look for a massive return on investment if it creates 500,000 jobs or something along those lines.
Yeah.
So again, I think it is pretty much a project by project kind of approach. Yeah. One more question from here. How do you see project development related to the transport section, like rail, e-mobility, and so forth? You must be involved with, through your network, with a lot of, I can imagine, entrepreneurs in that sphere. What is your take on project development. I mean, transport, I think, you know, from a goods export into Africa being connected, I think there's a lot of focus. We know that there's the Trans-Africa project, you know, the Cairo to Cape Town highway. So there are certainly some big transport infrastructure projects on, you know, that is important to the continent, but also to South Africa. So any other projects that you've come across that fall into this segment?
Samir, I'm wishing I had the DTI slide or the African Development Bank slide that John uses now and then, because he talks about the Africa level trade and export infrastructure. So yeah, that Cape to Cairo, the transport corridors, and that goes hand in hand with the recent changes to the Africa Free Trade Agreement that's come into place in the 1st of January. So at a continent and a regional level, there are both projects and legislation in place to make import-export cross-border business easier and cheaper, both from cost and taxes point of view and from administration. At the South Africa level, I must tell you, I would probably say to Emil, go back into your database and sort how many transport projects there are. Because we have massive urbanization, I would assume that, well, in fact, my really no data, my personal thumbsuck out of the air thing is there's no money being spent from a government point of view in the transport infrastructure space. I don't know what actually the plan is. In way back when, in my evil youth, I actually did project investment ranking for the South African Department of Roads. Our official internal rate of return hurdle was 15%, I believe, at the time. So we assumed a 7% inflation, so a real rate of 8%. When we ranked the projects by the IRRs versus budget, anything below 40% rate of return couldn't get funded. So when you talk about project funding and internal rates of return and investment from a government point of view, there simply isn't enough money. The priorities for government is around healthcare, education, and basic service delivery. And I don't think that they include transport as a key priority. So I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not close enough to that to answer that in more detail.
How long ago was this?
I give my age away here. This was in the early mid-90s. So this is when it was.
Okay,
when,
so it's a while ago.
Yeah, when SANRAL was still called National Department of Transport. It's that long ago.
It's a while ago. Right, so let's just go into Africa. We go into Southern Africa. Let's just see what we have there in terms of transport infrastructure. Let's just go transport. Then my transport here would include all of these. So bridges, causeways, dry ports, railroads, seaports. Let's just go ongoing and under construction. Let's have a look and see what we have. So there we go. We got about 4 dry ports, roads, bridges. There's a few. Bear in mind that we kind of filter out for projects in the million and up, because it's just when it becomes kind of real projects. So hopefully you can see this. Apologize, I see you keep on getting a warning that the internet isn't strong enough here. So let's just go to the different stages. Hopefully you can see this, and we can see currently, there's 300 million on the bridge project. And there's a few in the planning stage, and there's still 2.2 billion that's under construction at the moment. So there is a bit of money there, and you can see it's all transport related. So it is, I guess, government funded. Players there. Let's see, it'll be hopefully the same. There we go. Roads Agency is. We see some on the province level like this. Some rail. Okay, that's consultants. Let's just go down and look at who's the main developers there. That would be interesting to see. All right, so there we go. Transnet's got a bit, airports company, and then obviously there's some good, yeah. Transport from the government. So we've got 4 projects, Wild Coast of bridges and a couple of roads is being upgraded. Not massive, but still, there's a bit of activity there. If we look at maybe who's the main players, let's go look at who's the top, contractors there. And this will obviously only for projects that's currently being developed. There we go. Rubik's Construction. You can see they're working on 3 of those projects. So a bit of activity in South Africa. So that's good to know. Let's see, we've got a couple more questions there. I don't know if you have any questions from your side, Christo.
No, I want to do a slight sales pitch for both of us to Samuel here. Sorry, Samuel, we're going to sell to you now, so you've been warned. I think, are there bankable, saleable projects in sub-Saharan or SADC Africa or in South Africa? I think that's a question that we can ask the database. Are there opportunities? Absolutely. The second part of the question, do local municipalities have a mandate to enter into these agreements? I don't know the exact deep regulatory things. And the reason I don't know is that we have a member who his entire business is around setting up PPP projects. And that includes the scoping, the technical feasibility, the funding requirements, and getting the necessary approvals. So I think this is for me, if you are interested specifically in investment in solar, the starting point would be, say to Emil, which projects are there? In which countries are we interested? And then the second step of that would be coming to an organization such as ourselves or others in the market saying, can you help me with getting through the local red tape and finding local partners, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we'll have a look, maybe while we got the time. So let's just go back to the database, just go look at the power side and then rerun this report of ours. Let's say, okay, not look at transport, let's just go look at power, energy in this case. Go, so there's all sorts of traditional, renewable, everything is included there. And I'm going to take off the contractor, so just so we can get a feel and say, well, let's go search. I know for a fact that, even on the water side, there's PPP projects on local municipality level. I know of 2 of them specifically. So they do occur. Okay, so this is, companies, let's go back to the list here. So we can see power side there is quite a lot. This is just power, so with traditional as well, so it's close to 50 billion. If we want to be specific, let's go and look at solar only. So it's not all renewable, it's just pure solar. So there we go. We've got, it's $22 billion worth of solar projects. That's quite a lot. Some of it's a bit big, Uppington, you can see that huge development that's planned. A few is under a bit of evaluation at the moment, and then quite a lot under construction. There's quite a lot. Let's just go here, by stage. It will give us a feel for, 3 billion is currently being built with 15 billion planned, although that includes a massive Uppington one. But there we go. So there's quite a lot in there. And we've got a good relationship with some funders. As you know, we work with Global Islamic Financial Services and so on. And I know we specifically are looking at a number of solar or renewable energy. Some of it is hydro, sub-Saharan Africa, but solar, yes, we are looking at a number of solar projects for funding at the moment. So I think, is there projects? You can say yes, there are. And there's funding available. I mean, we know there's funding available. I think what we need, the big issue in South Africa that I can see is, some of them's already set up, but my understanding with this, the change in the regulation for the, for businesses that can actually, I guess, I don't want to call it captive power because it's not captive. You can feed into the grid, but up to 100 megawatt, not requiring a license. So that's been announced, received a lot of attention. And my understanding now is it's still not been published in the Gazette, which means it's kind of a bit in limbo. Yeah, it's coming, but it's not law yet. So come back to our machine and our discussion before. about, the political will. Yes, it's been announced from the top, but we haven't seen it, rolled out. The machine hasn't churned it. And that's the frustrating part for private sector, doing business with.
Yeah, I seem to think the independent power producer latest gazetted proposals are currently in the consultation process. So who knows how? Yeah, so there were some opposition to some of the licensing requirements that they put in place. So, depending on your point of view around government, they're still trying to maintain control and scrape as much of the revenue as they can. So for us, the starting point for all of these is where do you want to enter into the country? I have money that I want to invest in solar power because that's what my funders are saying we want to invest. Let's look at where in Africa is a safe place that is good for PPP, for solar, where do they have a need, where do they have projects, and work from that point out. I have money, I'm looking for existing projects, start with Emil and say, where are there opportunities? And then let's break that back down to how do we connect in Ghana, if Ghana is where we've decided we want to go and learn a bit more. So for me, I'm sorry if we're not giving the correct, specific, detailed answers, because that is my level of knowledge is superficial. But I think what we're trying to say to you with the tools that Emil have and the things that we do and other organizations is, if you have a need to do something in Africa, we have the ability to give you more information to help you make a decision. And then the ability through our various networks and partners, and I'm looking at ABiQ as well as ours, to actually execute that efficiently. So that's for us the great part of the opportunity is there are things in place to help you get into Africa.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's not that we just want to promote ourselves here, but there's so much information available with fantastic opportunities across the continent, not just sub-Saharan Africa, but all of Africa. Just reach out to either Shane or ourselves, and we can help, either way. We've got a couple of more questions, one from Michael. Just an answer in terms of actually, Michael, we typically would review every project in our database at least every 3 months. So if there's no traction or update, then, we will downgrade them. So it's a live database and every day there's changes. Happy to take you through that if you would like to. Kirsty, what do you see for the future? What's going to happen in South Africa over the next 5 years? Where's your crystal ball now? We would like to.
Having consistently called it wrong. My personal expectation or hope or goal that we're driving to essentially is that we deal with the unemployment in a. This is a very contentious statement, so apologies for toes that I step on. I'm going to annoy at least half of you. I think taking ownership of our own problems as South Africans, that's my expectation. So the entitlement, the waiting for government to fix, waiting for big business to fix, that is what I hope to see in the next 5 years. And I think that the drive is going to come from the small business sector, for the specific reason that if you look at growth and job creation in any economy in the world, governments don't do that. Big businesses don't do that. Innovation and creation comes from the small guys that are hustling and finding market niches. That's a little bit counter to this conversation, which is around big projects. But if there are jobs and money and taxes circulating in the economy, that creates the space where governments and private companies can do big projects with expected returns on investment. So for me, that's the scenario flag. If you use Clem Santa's phraseology, the scenario flag I'm watching is how do communities start creating jobs, which has a knock-on effect in the large infrastructure and service delivery projects that has been a lot of the focus of what we're talking about.
I totally agree with you again there, and we've had this conversation through a number of our webinars looking at think specifically it was power in East Africa, where, and we were talking about PPP projects there at the time, and the statement was made by one of the gentlemen saying that government's role is to govern. They need to put in the legislation and the framework for companies to do business, and let the private sector do the development. Let them create the opportunities, the employment, because they can do it a lot more efficiently than government ever can. And you're right. We need small sector. You need SMEs is the heart of any successful country, whether it's US, Europe, it doesn't matter where you go. Those big, look at Germany. There's millions of small-time manufacturers develop creative companies, you name it, and they are, one of the largest exporters. And that's what you need. You need to have that framework and that mindset to facilitate and support your SMEs, get them going. The more, the better. Yes, there's going to be failures, and I think that for me is one of the biggest criticisms to any developing country is the fact that they do not make it easy enough for SMEs to start and flourish. There's so much red tape and bureaucracy that it's very hard for them to really, be successful. So, and that is what government needs to do. If they can start looking after the SMEs and make funding available, yes, there's going to be failures, but there's going to be a lot of successes as well. Either way, you're getting, income tax revenue, you're getting, employee taxes, you name it. There's users, consumers. That's what you need. Money needs to flow, But anyway, so I think that's critical. We need that for South Africa going forward.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about your time, but I would love to ask you a return question, which is, does ABiQ have a view around how crowdfunding and technology and real-time visibility of performance is going to change the thing that you are doing for your customers? Let's find large projects.
Well, I mean, it would be fantastic. I had a fascinating conversation this morning looking at agriculture, where this is a South African startup company that actually track farmers and soil quality and crop quality and provide them with information and, kind of consulting, improving methods from a farming perspective to improve yield, crop yields. And they have, I don't know how many thousands of farmers across Southern Africa on their database, and I wasn't too interested necessarily in the farmers themselves because they geotag, the farm, exactly where all the details. For me, it was more, can you imagine from a food security point of view, we can start looking at what is the crops on the fields today for Sub-Saharan Africa. And you have, through some of the macro stuff that we do, we know where the needs are. Because that's easy to do. We can tell you where the hotspots for the need for future food demand is. The difficulty is find out where the hell they come from. Where's the production going to come? Where's the supply going to come from? And that's we had a bit of a hiccup. COVID-19 suddenly disrupt the supply chains. Everybody took note. Now I think lulling again. But
personal interest. Off the record, I'm going to have to check with you because I worked with an idea accelerator incubator 3 or 4 years ago that was looking at exactly that solution. So data visualization for small farming. So okay, I mean, it's a fantastic field. So I think 5 years from now, we may have conversations around what happened to the big projects and the big companies because it's all micro targeted, micro focused.
I think, from an infrastructure point of view, stuff's still got to be big. And there's such a massive infrastructure deficit across the continent that we need big stuff, but we need stuff across Africa to be driven by somebody like the African Union. We need somebody that can stand up and say, right, here's a coordinated approach where we need to allocate our resources to make sure that, we get the road that can actually connect Cape Town to Cairo. There's no point. We have these little bits, but we never get the road finished. Yes, okay, it creates jobs and things like that, but it never reaches the ultimate goal. So we need a bit of an entity that's, it's not government, but it's somebody that can just take an overarching umbrella view and say that, okay, this is, here's a demand here, we need to do something about it. It's not them fixing it, it's just them coordinating it.
That might be the conversation or a topic for one of our next seminars, because I suspect actually if you look at the free trade agreement and the Africa infrastructure plan, sometimes in South Africa, we're so obsessed with our own challenges that we don't realize that at a continent level, there is actually some pretty good things happening. So,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's information sharing. That's, you know, it's critical to build a sustainable way forward, I think. Right, so Christy, I appreciate your inputs and thank you very much for your time. I think we come to a conclusion. There's no more questions. We've answered all the questions online. Any presentations we've had will be shared after, well, probably tomorrow, emailed out. But thank you so much. And hopefully we can have another session in the near future and more fruitful discussions about Africa and its development.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity for us to talk to also your members and to all the participants. Thank you very much for showing up and engaging with us. There's nothing worse as a panelist or a presenter to have 0 questions. So my thanks to you for giving us so much information to play with today.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Until next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Eric. Goodbye, everyone.